With a quarter of the season in the books and the Dolphins on their bye, now is a great time to look ahead to the upcoming offseason. Players on expiring contracts, salary cap space, compensatory picks, and more here today on Locked On Dolphins.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, author of Touchdown Miami on Substack, and the NFL Draft Lead for the 33rd team. You can find all of our shows here on the Locked On Network on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Tip of the cap to our everydayers, because it is your team every day. We don't just say it. We live it here on the Locked On Network. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL in all lowercase to win $50 instantly when you play $5. The Dolphins are on their bye this week. But catch your breath. Collective exhale. Not the start anybody imagined. I think that much is definitely true. Dolphins sitting at 2-3. Kind of a Wild West type of landscape in the AFC in general right now, where you have teams like Cincinnati at 1-4, the Jets at 2-3, and firing their coach yesterday, Robert Saleh. I would imagine they're probably going to make their next desperation move and trade for Davante Adams soon before long. But Jacksonville is a playoff contender now, sitting at 1-4. It's a mess, and it's still very early. And I don't say that to suggest that the issues the Dolphins have had in the first 5 weeks are going to magically go away. The team has to do that themselves, and they have to do that internally, because I don't think a lot of reinforcements are coming other than the presumed return of quarterback Tua Tagovailoa from his stint on IR from a week 2 concussion. But now's a great time to look across the landscape of this football team, because there's no game to get ready for this week. There's no crossover Thursday tomorrow, right? On the Locked On Network, we do Thursdays with crossovers. It's just a week alone in our thoughts here on Locked On Dolphins. So with the news coming out that Christian Wilkins was going to go on IR for the Raiders, and that being a big loss that the Dolphins had in free agency, and obviously the contract that he signed put him in a stratosphere for the Dolphins, and there was much to do about compensatory picks this offseason. There's a lot of questions that Dolphins fans had about that. So I thought now would be a good time to just kind of zoom out and look at the 2025 offseason based off of the first quarter of this season and what has been collected and what the domino effect could potentially look like for the Miami Dolphins. So I want to start with players on expiring contracts. There's a number of critical players for the Dolphins that are expiring contract type of players, and just kind of summarize how they've played thus far this season and the urgency that Miami could or should feel about getting these players back under new contracts with the team. So you've got long in the tooth veterans, guys 30 or older, like Emmanuel Ogbah, who's your highest snapping taking edge player. He's had some good sack production. I think he's been better this year than he was last year. I think if you were going to profile him, put him in a bucket as far as like a roster categorization, ideally he's a quality depth player for you on your defensive front rotation. But he's getting starter snaps for the Dolphins because Phillips is down again, and Bradley Chubb is still working his way back from the season-ending injury that he had last year. So it changes the dynamics of his role. In a perfect world, he's a rotational guy, and I think he's proven to be better than the player that he was that we saw in 2023. But he signed for $3 million at the start of camp with some incentive dollars tacked on top of that. Odell Beckham, we're getting our first sampling of Odell Beckham after about a dozen snaps in week 5 against New England. So that's to be determined. Jeff Wilson is going to be 29 years old as an expiring contract, one of the higher AAVs for an expiring contract for the Dolphins this upcoming offseason. Kendall Lamb, we know he's on his way to retirement at the end of the year, or at least that's been his communicated plan. Duke Riley is a special teams player who's been a frustrating player the last couple of weeks with some miscues. Jordan Poyer, Calais Campbell. Campbell's been an amazing signing for the Dolphins. Not a lot of players you lose a lot of sleep over until you get a little deeper here on the depth chart or a little deeper here on the annual average salary of their current contracts, and you see a rookie contract player in Javon Holland, who is going to be, according to Mike McDaniel, week to week. Some kind of hand injury that sounds like it's going to cost him at least a game. Fortuitous window for the Dolphins to get the bye as it pertains to Javon Holland. So your depth safety is getting tested a little bit. Holland obviously made the huge play that helped save the game against Jacksonville in week 1. But there's been ups and downs. There's been frustrating moments too. And for Javon Holland, as a guy who's going to be in the prime of his career, he's going to turn 25 a little later this year. You're looking at a player, or before he goes into free agency, you're looking at a player who is hopefully looking at, I don't want to say a market reset type contract, but a very robust contract. And I just don't know that play has been there. And now, after missing an extended period last year with the knee injuries, I don't know how this selling point is going to go for Javon based off the first quarter of the season and now an injury that puts him in a week-to-week status. It's a player I'd love to have. I just don't know that where the dollars are going to line up here relative to the safety market and Javon's performance and what Javon's expectations are and his agency and the reputation that Javon has as being a highly graded player who can do a lot of different things. And I do think could be in a position to make more impact if he moved around more. It's a very difficult one to try to filter through. And depending on what the rest of the offseason looks like for Miami, this might be a player that I would maybe look for a little extra clarity with the franchise tag option for. I mean, if you're going to burn a franchise tag on Mike Gesicki and get nothing for it, you could certainly justify a player as a starting safety in Javon Holland to get a little bit more clarity on how it looks. Now, he also has 3 quarters of the season to kind of change the narrative and really stake his claim the way that he's capable of. So we shall see on that front. David Long's the other one. David Long's going to be 28 years old. As a stack-off ball linebacker, he's been great against the run. I think the chemistry with the other linebackers is as expected in a new scheme, something that took a little bit of time. He was back in a platoon this past week. Obviously missed the previous week in week 4 against Tennessee with a hamstring injury. Hamstring issues for David have unfortunately kind of been a thing throughout his last couple of years in Tennessee. He was fully healthy last year in Miami. But as far as expiring contracts go, this is the highest annual average salary contract that the Dolphins have set to come off the books. It's David Long. It's $5.5 million. It's a 2-year, $11 million deal. I don't think it would be a cost prohibitive player if you wanted to get a new contract done with David Long. I would certainly be in support of it if a decision was made to give David Long a new contract, whether that's in season or outside of season. I would say I was certainly a little more hopeful for more consistent against the pass play that was considered to be one of David's strengths coming here from Tennessee. And it's kind of been the inverse. I think he's been better against the run than he has been against the pass. Lee Meichenberg is another starting player. Graded horribly the last 2 weeks for me with my snap-by-snap grading of all the players. I thought he was solid the first 3 weeks as a sufficient level player based on what he was being asked to do. But the last 2 weeks, his grades have really regressed as a player that's also coming off a rookie contract. And same goes for Robert Jones. Robert Jones actually had his best game against New England, but the first 3 weeks was a really frustrating study. So the rest of this is really a lot of depth players, a lot of veteran depth type of players. Players, I don't know that I would be falling over myself to get a contract offer set to any of these guys through the first month of the season. And all this business has to continue and be conducted as a season unfolds. And I know that there's fans that want to make changes to football operations. And you probably, if you're in that school of thought, you probably don't want to give out contract extensions. But good players are good players. And you know, I know Miami has gotten criticized for not getting some contracts done with good players sooner and then losing them in free agency because they hit the open market and hit a stratosphere that Miami couldn't afford. So there are some good players that are set to be expiring contracts, like David Long, like Javon Holland, but relative to their positions and what their expectations are and their performance, I don't know that you've just had like something that's going to come to a head and be like, hey, we really got to get this done now and lock it in because it's a no-brainer. I think parties are probably going to have a little bit of a divide. Now, if you told me you wanted to sign Calais Campbell to a contract extension, that's probably the one who has most definitively earned one if he wants it. But the complicating factor there, of course, is he's just turned 38 years old. So we're going to look at compensatory picks, Christian Wilkins, Robert Hunt, the magnitude of Christian Wilkins and his injury. Does that affect the Dolphins? All that's next here on this episode of Locked On Dolphins. Make sure you stick with us. PrizePicks is the best place to get real money sports action with over 10 million members and billions of dollars in award winnings. PrizePicks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. Run your game all season long with PrizePicks. You can now win 100 times your money with as little as 4 correct picks. PrizePicks is the best place to get real money sports action. You can join 10 million users by signing up today. And best of all, it is you against the house. It is not you playing against 10 million other active users. You can sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. PrizePicks also offers weekly promotions that can lead to big payouts like Taco Tuesday. Each Tuesday, PrizePicks discounts select player projections up to 25%, even more value for your lineups. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly when you play $5 for your lineup. That is with code LOCKEDONNFL. Download the app today. Use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 off instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. So if you remember, and we did a whole show on compensatory picks and the science, the math behind compensatory picks, and it was a big thing thrust into the spotlight with this past offseason because the Dolphins chose to let players like Robert Hunt and Christian Wilkins leave on big money contracts, and the types of players that they pursued and a replacement of that drew some ire. And the Dolphins were kind of selective about unrestricted free agents versus qualifying compensatory free agents, players that had their contracts terminated as compared to having their contracts expire because it impacts the compensatory pick formula. And when it was all said and done and the compensatory pick window closed, the period of time from the start of the league calendar year in March to the Monday after the NFL draft, that period of time, all player transactions are weighted into whether or not the league is going to award you compensatory picks. And the Dolphins at the end of that window were projected to receive 3 picks for the 2025 NFL draft. 1 for Christian Wilkins, 1 for Robert Hunt, and 1 for Deshaun Elliott. As things currently stand, the Dolphins are still projected to receive all 3 of those compensatory picks. Christian Wilkins and Robert Hunt, according to overthecap.com, are both currently tracking as third-round picks. So if the season ended today, Miami would, according to Over the Cap and their reverse engineering of the compensatory pick formula, they would qualify for 2 3s. And then Deshaun Elliott would be a 7. And Deshaun Elliott is a player, because he's in the 7th round range, if he were to miss a significant amount of time with playing time, because it's not just how much money you sign for and where that ranks amongst your peers, there's also things like percentage of snap taken that can help tweak and push up or down players from being a 3rd round pick to a 4th round pick, or being a 4th round pick to a 5th round pick, or being a 7th round pick to not qualifying for a compensatory pick at all. So if you're rooting for the 7th round pick, you need Deshaun Elliott to stay healthy. Now, he's been playing for Pittsburgh. So far, so good. Robert Hunt, according to the calculations through Over the Cap, and we knew this was going to be the case. We did this when we did the show. He's right on the cusp. And he's playing 98% of the snaps. for the Carolina Panthers this year. If Robert Hunt plays all season long, if he starts all 17 games, he should track for a third-round pick. If he misses even just a handful of games, you're probably looking at Miami receiving a fourth-round pick instead. Right now, he's playing 98% of the snaps, and that puts him 6 points out in front of the threshold, and that's with 1,905 total points is what he is credited with in the total calculation. The cutoff right now is 1899. So he's 6 points out in front of the cutoff from being a fourth-round pick, so he still projects good for Miami, but he needs to stay healthy. And the question came with Christian Wilkins. The report came out yesterday. It was obviously the other marquee player the Dolphins lost. The report came out from Ian Rappaport. Sources: Raiders star defensive tackle Christian Wilkins is out indefinitely after undergoing surgery to repair a Jones fracture in his foot. Wilkins, Las Vegas's big money free agent acquisition, being out is a crushing blow to the middle of the defense. He will head to injured reserve, which means he will miss at least the next 4 games. At least the next 4 games. And Dolphins fans, their reaction was, well, that's so Dolphins. We're going to get screwed on the compensatory pick. I looked at the formula that Over the Cap has, and this is being backed by Nick Corte, who does NFL contract analysis, contributes to Over the Cap, was one of the key figures in reconfiguring and reverse engineering Over the Cap's compensatory pick formula that they use to kind of calculate and project compensatory picks. And they have a very strong track record. And he chimed in and backed what my initial knee-jerk reaction was. Even if Christian Wilkins were to miss the rest of the season, and he might not, the Dolphins should still get a third-round 2025 compensatory pick for him leaving for Las Vegas. This is a top 5 defensive contract in all of football, right? That puts you in a certain stratosphere. That the money and the AAV of his contract would not be negated if he does not play anymore to a point in which it would cost Miami a round's worth. Should be the case. Is there a world where 40 other players in the NFL play every single snap for the rest of the season and he falls out? Yes. Is that likely to happen? No. As an example, Cooper Kupp is on this list, and he's missing games for the Patriots right now. Like Cooper Kupp would have to play every snap the rest of the way, and Christian Wilkins would have to miss every snap the rest of the way for Cooper Kupp to pass him in theory. And Cooper Kupp's missing time already. A.J. Brown has missed games. I could go down the list here, and just Nico Collins is on this list. He's going on IR today. He would have to play every snap. So it's like when you start to look at it through the lens of Tua Tagovailoa would have to play every snap the rest of the way to pass Christian Wilkins on the compensatory pick chart. He's guaranteed to miss the next game because he's on injured reserve for at least one more game. Like so you see how it's almost a stone cold lock. I can't guarantee it, but I have very, very, very high confidence that based on the players that would need to pass Christian Wilkins, many of them are already in a position to miss additional games. And that would include Christian not playing again this season, which is not a given. It's just out indefinitely. So you're at least projecting for a 3 and a 4. You could get a 7 if Deshaun Elliott stays healthy, and you could get a 3 instead of a 4 if Robert Hunt could stay healthy. But you're still looking very good to get that 3 as obviously an important replacement because you traded a 3 for a 4 this year to go get Jalen Wright and then realize how good Jalen Wright was and play him and actually run him against New England. Right. Salary cap situation. I know there's a lot of questions about the contract of Tua Tagovailoa, where the Dolphins are at in salary cap space, all that kinds of stuff. We're going to get into it next here on this episode of Locked On Dolphins. Make sure that you stick with us. NFL fans, you could start your season with a big return over on FanDuel, America's #1 sports book, when you get the hunch in the middle of the game. You can check out the latest stats, a few live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you also happen to place your bets. You can get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet on FanDuel. It's FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. Time is our most precious commodity, so don't waste it scrolling through the same mind-numbing content for hours and hours. How can you spend wisely your time to improve yourself? History, economics, great works of literature. If you study these things at school, great. If you didn't, or if you're interested in doing so, our sponsor, Hillsdale College, is offering more than 40 free, that's right, free online courses. A few of them include Constitution 101, the meaning and history of the Constitution, Introduction to Free Market Economics, Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire. All of Hillsdale's courses are self-paced, so you could start whenever and tune in wherever. Plus, you could go deeper with readings, quizzes, discussions, or just enjoy the lectures. Right now, you can go to hillsdale.edu/lockedon to enroll. There's no cost, and it is easy to get started. That's hillsdale.edu/lockedon to register. Hillsdale.edu/lockedon. All right. Salary cap outlook. If the Dolphins need to do a dramatic overhaul and reset, what can they do? Or is next year a lost year? Well, depending on how significantly they choose to change the direction of the franchise, if they choose to change the direction of the franchise, and you don't want to be presumptive because it's October 9th, right? But we like to have all of our bases covered. The Dolphins, according to Spot Track, right now have about $22.5 million in salary cap space. My personal table of salary cap space for Miami has them around 23. The NFLPA confirmed before the beginning of the season that they were sitting about $23 million in cap space. And I know that between the cap resources, there was some disagreement on some fine print for roster bonuses versus option bonuses for Tyreek Hill and his contract, and Tua Tagovailoa and his contract that they redid or that they agreed to before the start of the season. So the NFLPA number seems to back one approach to the bookkeeping of those. And I have that reflected in my personal sheet as well that I keep for the Dolphins in their salary cap space. What the 2025 forecast looks like depends on what you project the 2025 salary cap growth to be. I've chosen to keep this thing simple. I've looked at the last 3-year sample size and the average percentage of growth of salary cap, and I've applied that from this year to next year for salary cap, which puts it around $273.5 million. If that's the number that it checks in at, my bookkeeping has the Dolphins about $4.5 million over. It's going to be different on Over the Cap. It's going to be different on Spot Track. I have my own bookkeeping because it's the way that it makes the most sense to me, right? And I know based on certain language in contracts, certain things activate, certain things trigger that reduces a number that might be reflected in one spot and another one, and they both categorize all kinds of finances differently. So I have taken the liberty to do it myself so that it's easier for me to compartmentalize and keep track of. Reminder with salary cap space, whatever you don't use, you can roll over, right? And put it into next year's cap. So as things currently stand, Miami's probably in a position where they're probably going to be able to roll over. I want to leave a little room for the practice squad for the last 3 quarters of the season, probably a few more personnel moves. Let's say it's $16 million. Let's say it's $17 million. Right? So you're going to be about $12, $13 million under the cap with the rollover cap before you make any personnel moves. And that doesn't include player extensions. That doesn't include player restructures. That doesn't include player re-signings. If you wanted to take a Javon Holland and put him on the franchise tag, or if you got a contract extension done with him or with David Long or with Calais Campbell, fingers crossed, like let's hope so. You about $13 million to work with. That's the bad news, is it's not a lot of space. But the good news is you still, based on how you structured your contract, have a ton of flexibility to rework contracts, to part ways with certain guys, to create extensions and create more cap space. And whoever is ultimately in charge of football operations is still going to have all this flexibility at their disposal, whether you want it to be the people who are currently in place or if you don't want it to be the people who are currently in place. It doesn't change the fact that it's all accessible for whoever is going to take it. And there's players that are under contract that I think, whether it's the current brain trust or not, it would probably be wise to restructure Zach Sieler's contract and get some salary cap space in that regard. Austin Jackson, I would restructure that one. Jordan Brooks, I would restructure that one. Now, if the team throws their hands up and says, we want to get out of it, they could do so. You're probably going to take some, or you're going to be guaranteed to take some dead money. And there's some contracts that I would get out of. I would get out of the Durham Smythe contract. Right? I want to, let's see, you could probably move on from Channing Tindall in the offseason. Not that it's a ton of cap savings. Jason Sanders is a name that's probably up for consideration as well. Raheem Mostert will be coming into the last year of his contract after he got a 1-year extension this past offseason. Do you do that again? Does Jalen Wright take the reins and show you that he's a competent person to step in for the Raheem Mostert role after Raheem Mostert reminded everybody this past week how much more impactful he is as the guy running the outside zone stuff? I'm like that. That's why you want to wait and let it all play out. If the Dolphins were to take their losses with the Tua Tagovailoa contract, they need to make a decision by 3/15. They could designate him as a post-June 1st cut in order to prevent his 2026 salary from guaranteeing. That in itself, if that's the decision that's made, one of two things has happened. Either you've made a change at the top with your football operations, or you have collectively agreed that this is something that you want to go in a different direction because you unfortunately can't trust Tua to do the smart thing on the field and protect himself from trying to make plays. And if that's the case, you're looking at Stephen Ross losing a significant amount of money. That's usually the kind of mistake and misstep that somebody loses their job over. But they could save $1 million in cap space, not a lot of money. And then obviously you would have 2026 dead cap. That's about $45 million in dead cap, but it's still $11 million less than what it's currently scheduled to be. And you would not be guaranteeing another 50-something million dollars in cash due in 2026. They built the out and the exit in the contract for a reason, to give themselves a chance to do it. The rest of this season probably is going to go a long way in determining whether or not they choose to do that. I have my opinion on what I would do. I want to let more of the process play out before we go too far down that rabbit hole. And I'm sure many of you have your own opinions of how that should play out as well. And that's totally fine. We shall see what it comes. But Miami has players like Teron Armstead. Retirement, not retirement. Probably his last year with the team regardless. That's $10+ million in savings that could be on tap for the team. Aaron Brewer, Zach Sieler, Jordan Brooks. These could be basic restructures of players. You have the opportunity to tap into somewhere around $30 million of like the no-brainer type of stuff. And that's before you get into Tua Tagovailoa. What are you doing with Tua Tagovailoa in his contract? Because if he's going to be here, you could restructure the base salary portion of that because he's got $25 million option bonus and the rest of it is base salary. Is he going to be here? You could restructure another 25 and create another $20 million in cap space. Is he not going to be here? Do you want to let it play as it go? I wouldn't do that. The worst thing you could do is just be like, all right, well, you're going to be here and we're going to guarantee the 2026 salary. And we're not going to do anything with your salary cap space because we don't want to prorate any more off into future years. I think that's probably the worst way you could play it. But they will have about the same amount of operating cap space as they did this past year. When they maxed out is what they will have or what they can have at their disposal at the beginning of March, at the beginning of the spending window. So it should be a more active free agency window for the Dolphins this offseason if they want it to be, or if they want to retain a few more players, if they want to sign a few more younger window quality starters or adequate level starters. They should have the ability to do that. So, like, no matter what direction the football operations thing goes, no matter what direction the quarterback situation goes, like I look at where they're set up, and I think they do have a nice opportunity to add talent to the roster and not add cheap, older, short-term talent to the roster, which, that was part of the strategy this year. And if Tua doesn't get hurt, we're probably having different conversations. We're probably still asking ourselves some uncomfortable questions about the ceiling of the team because you lost to Buffalo by multiple touchdowns anyway. But we'll let this play out and see what direction the season ultimately goes. And everybody has their own expectations for that. Or maybe you don't have expectations and you're just along for the ride. I'm buckled in and we're just along for the ride, right? But there's a lot of flexibility to be had regardless of who is making the decision. So what's your opinion of that? Should maybe fuel your enthusiasm for whatever opinion you have of, hey, this needs to be tweaked. Hey, we need wholesale changes. There's going to be a chance to make impactful changes this offseason between the extra draft capital with the compensatory picks, between the salary cap space, between the restructure potential of players that I view as players that should be here long-term no matter what. And that includes players like Austin Jackson and Aaron Brewer. And do you do it? Probably don't do a contract extension with Jalen Phillips. So you're probably going to sit on that $13.2 million. But then Jordan Brooks, Zach Sieler, you're going to have Teron Armstead space that's opening up. Like there's a lot. There's still a lot of space to be had. Plus you have carryover cap at your disposal. So it's going to be really interesting. But the next 12 games are really going to define the temperature of everything. But I do think it's one of those things that you put everything under the microscope and you have to reevaluate everything that you're doing. 12 games is a pretty good sample size. So is 5, but 12 is much bigger and 17 is what we need. So I hope this offseason check-in kind of helps everybody recenter themselves after a trying start to the season, and we know what we're looking for moving forward. I'm Kyle Krabs. You can keep it locked in right here on Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day. I appreciate you guys checking the show. You can find us on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Make it a good one. I am out of here.